sure, a great deal follows. A lot follows in terms of the person's belief and how they conduct their lives and how they relate to other people. So spiritual experiences, nothing follows scientifically. I totally agree.
No, nothing follows about the existence of a reality beyond the experience.
But much follows in terms of that person's
No, I agree with
personhood.
that. When I say nothing follows, what I mean is if I have a mystical experience in which I sense the existence of God, let's say, it doesn't follow that God exists. That's just an experience.
Not from a scientific point of view,
Not from any point of view. I just had that experience. That's an interesting experience.
You need to look back in order to see where we've been going. And it turns out that there were ancient spiritual traditions, Kabbalah, for example, the ancient people of Chaldea around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, who saw the nature of spirit and soul and consciousness in a way which is more reminiscent of the way quantum physics would speak about such a process in terms of the vacuum of space as being the home of the soul or the home of the spirit, and vibrations of nothing, vibrations of the vacuum of space, as being the conscious effervescence of which we partake in. And the memories that we all have, we think, oh, that's only my memory. Your brain is 1,000,000 years old. It's got memories going way
Warren
back.
over here is a little amused by all this. Tell us what's amusing about this.
Well, it's just going to a level that within my area of science, it's very difficult to deal with. I mean, to postulate ancient non-physical entities as being a part of who I am now in that sense. I certainly would suggest that God exists, that there is a spiritual universe, and that what we have in ancient religious traditions is some changing attempts to represent that. But whether that has anything to do with what I am as a person, I really, that is a big leap to me, to leap from there to myself and my consciousness. And
you know, I have read a commonality between the books of the person on my right and left, no political implication here whatsoever, in that both of you, Charlie and Fred, in your own approaches, have used as a proof of what you do, of the legitimacy, as because what science has achieved in the world has been a lot of bad things. And therefore, we need to look to other things than traditional science to help us out. But doesn't this confuse morality with reality? And as far as it doesn't matter what science achieves, good or evil, truth is amoral, like it or not. Why is the result is so important?
You're putting me in a box. I'm not going to let you put you in, Robert. I have nothing against science, and I don't attribute the bad things in the world to science. I never have. What people do with the truths discovered by science, that's a matter of morality and intelligence and so forth. That's different. What I object to is scientism. It's when someone, for instance, and I've counseled innumerable people like this, has a spiritual experience and they mention it in front of someone who thinks they're being scientific and says, that's impossible, you must be crazy. That I don't like. That dismissal of people's actual experiences, that's not good science, that's scientism, that's arrogance in the disguise of science.
That's been my major concern. Coming out of the scientific rank is my own arrogance, how arrogant I could be to put down other people's ideas that didn't agree with my scientific view of the world. And so in my recognizing my own arrogance, I began to see that where am I coming from? When I went around the world and spent time with indigenous peoples in various tribal situations, I realized my arrogance just didn't fit in. And as long as I held on to my scientific view, I couldn't see. I was blind. We need to use our heart and our spirit in ways that that I think science should begin to adapt.
I don't see this opposition that you make between biology and nature on the one hand and spirituality on the other, because of course this need for meaning and for transcendence, that's as much biologically based as any other need. That is, it's part of our genetic structure and part of our the culture that we built on this genetic structure, that we would like to find things that transcend the stupidity and mediocrity of most everyday existence. But I don't see a a conflict between that and the rest of nature. That's part of nature.
There's a problem with it, and the problem is it leads to separation, to separatist views, to isolation, to aloneness, to feeling of not being part, whereas our natural inclination is we are a community.
But that's
And we're-
partly these old categories, like science versus non-science, mind versus body. I think these categories are obsolete.
I agree.
There's just knowledge. Let's find out how the world works. Sometimes when we get satisfied about how the world works to the point that you can get a grant from the NSF, people are willing to call it science. I don't care if they call what I do science. It doesn't matter. As long as we get at the truth, who cares if it's science? And, of course, if we got all kinds of strange phenomena, they're worthy of study.
Don't you find it interesting that biological systems, in your terms, have a need for meaning? Did that evolve?
That seems to me, of course it evolved. It seems to me absolutely fascinating. But there isn't any doubt about it. I mean, there isn't any doubt that people like ourselves with our pathetic 46 chromosomes and 100 billion neurons, that we have evolved this tremendous intellectual capacity for transcending the stupidity and mediocrity of most of the things that fill our ordinary lives. That's what makes life interesting.
Right, and so the key here is what is the nature of the scientific evidence that for spirituality? And if I'm just taking spirituality here as something like transcending the ordinary boundaries of space and time. And I was struck by a remark earlier on about spoon bending. Of course, spoon bending, the scientific evidence is very, very poor. But, and from the popular sense, that's all that most people know about the realm of research, which is relevant. But in fact, there's a huge body of additional research, much of it published in mainstream journals, which says that there are anomalies out there, mostly perceptual, that suggests that some of the concepts that revolve around ideas of spirituality, in fact, do have some scientific evidence.
I welcome all the facts we can lay our hands on, and I certainly am not, I don't want to say anything to suggest that we shouldn't accumulate all this data, but there is a mistake that it seems to me came up a couple of times already in our discussion that we want to avoid, and that's the mistake of assuming either these data are fraudulent, either there's some sort of fraud being perpetrated, or they are conclusive proof of the supernatural. There are all kinds of other possibilities.
I think there's a larger problem, and that is the nature of God's action in the universe. I think that's a problem. But I don't think it's necessary to bring that problem to the action of a soul within the psychological or physical action of a human being. I mean, I think you can understand that as an embodied physical process, a part of the brain, an emergent function of the kinds of things that the brain does.
What are the ethical implications of that if you despiritualize the soul?
Well, we've actually had to take that up in our book. If you make it a cognitive process, you have this problem of how about the cognitively impaired? And what we're really saying is that what soul is meant to tell us about is the nature and experiences of personal relatedness. And so it's really an adjective term. It's soulish or soulishness.
Charles, Warren's description of soulishness, how does that articulate with your own view of spirituality?
It's too abstract. I've got to bring this back to a more concrete thing.
Well, I thought it was
If you're
pretty concrete.
if you're a Christian, prayer is a central aspect of Christianity.
Yes.
Now, from a conventional scientific point of view, if the mind is nothing but the electrochemical processes in the brain, when you pray, you're talking to yourself, and that's the end of it.
No.
Maybe it makes you feel better, but then they'll develop a drug that'll make you feel better someday.
That's why I say the real problem goes back to the nature of God's action in the universe. It doesn't have to be brought down to the nature.
We're going
of
to
the
keep
human
this
being.
program on the soul,
Soul.
and we're going to leave theology out of
Okay.
it.
So
And we have to take a prediction. 100 years from now, what more has happened to the soul? Charlie.
We have evidence that one mind can communicate with another with no known channel of that. That is a mechanism for prayer.
John.
Yeah, 100 years from now, we'll know enough about the brain so that the anomalous stuff that we're struck with today will no longer seem so mysterious to us.
Dean.
Actually, I completely agree with that, but it will also redefine what we think of as soul.
I would agree with that, but say there will still be some mystery in the universe as a whole, in that I don't think scientifically we're able to approach the idea of God's action in the universe.
Any more mysteries left, Fred?
All of the above. There will still be mystery, and we will begin to realize that there is something about us that is not just my self and yourself and his self and ourself, but there's a unity to us all of which we are all a reflection. That'll become very real for us.
The question of non-physical souls may be more complex than commonly assumed. Scientists and theologians, it seems, are still found on both sides of that great divide. But can the scientific method even address the issue? Can science seek the soul? There appear to be two answers. Yes, discoveries of brain function eliminate artificial mysteries, previously the province of the soul. And no, there may be certain kinds of knowledge the scientific method cannot access. Some say that we should combine science and theology, but compromise may not bring us closer to truth. I'm Robert Kuhn.